Beautiful. Hello, it is a happy and joyous Monday in Shotcaller's eSports Studios. I'm Eric Kummel, once again joined by no one. I know I said last week was the last time you'd be stuck with my voice the entire show, but apparently I lied, and we're going to have to go through it again for this hour, but at least we got plenty to talk about. The LCS is officially back, and it came out. It was a banger in week one, some upsets, some surprise 2-0 teams, some very surprise 0-2 teams. We'll look at some of the undefeated and teams without a win yet in NA. We'll also go through some power rankings later on, as well as what's going on with the meta, because some of these games are ridiculously long. And as always, we'll be answering your questions towards the end of the show, so make sure you're sending those in as well. We've also got a special interview with Afromoo from his time this week at the NALCS studios with the eSports Network. They're going to be bringing that to us a little later on in the show. But let's start off with some of these 2-0 teams. One of those features Afromoo on it. But first, we're talking about Equifox, because that was a surprise. You know, this is a team that people have said, and I believe as well, has the potential to be a higher top seed in the playoffs if they can avoid, you know, tilt and all the things that a lot of these guys on these teams are associated with. But in week one, they looked fantastic, and the man leading the way for them was Huni, man coming off a berth in the World Championship Finals with SKT. Everyone knew he'd come back and be a dominant force in NA. He's been a solid top laner, a top laner in whatever league he's in for pretty much his entire career, and he looked fantastic in week one. He absolutely demolished Solo in game 2 against Clutch Gaming, which, you know, a lot of people expected. He to get some help from Dardoch, but I mean, they got that first turret, and that's the main thing that helped lead them to get here. Yeah, their competition wasn't super hard in week 2, but I mean, the main reason they won against Clutch and FlyQuest on day 1 was just the amount of pressure that Huni was drawing, and they really had no answer for him in terms of Clutch. And both of these games, Fox just had such a dominant fashion, a dominant win in both of those games, some sub 30-minute ones, which is unheard of in this first week of LCS. But yeah, the split push from Huni on that Gnar, obviously. The old Lucian meme in the first week, he was getting flanks on Lucian in that one, but the story, Huni on the Gnar in that game too, he was absolutely fantastic for them. And as we expected, their bottom lane, pretty much nothing bad you can say about Alltech and Adrian through these first 2 games. And Phoenix is a guy who performed amazingly on that Azir, outclassed Femivin in the mid lane, which I certainly did not expect. We know Phoenix is comfortable on Azir, callbacks to that CLG quadra kill, but didn't expect them to do that well. And Dardoch, with some dominant laners, you get fast games. This team's looking like Immortals circa 2016, but they look very solid going forward. Another 2-0 team after week 1 is 100 Thieves. Again, they didn't have the most difficult schedule in week 1, but I mean, they did beat CLG in day 2, and that's obviously what people are picking as a playoff team. I think they're going to go deep in playoffs, but 100 Thieves look really solid. So how'd they beat CLG? Kept the bottom lane. Some level 3 ganks here with Meteos coming in just to get this Ezreal Braum ahead and kind of take away from that Caitlyn dominance in lane. You had teleports from Ryu coming in, and that pressure early on in that bottom lane allowed them to grab a couple of dragons early on. Eventually, they're able to knock down that bottom tier turret. So they were just playing through that bottom lane early on. Meteos giving it all that attention. And then one of the big changing points in this game is Stixxay walking forward right into a Malzahar ult with no QSS. Good night. Stopwatch is not going to be enough for them, and that was the main one of the main team fights that really pushed it into 100 Thieves advantage. They're able to secure a Baron off of that. But I mean, the pressure bottom lane, Meteos sat there for the majority of the early game, and Ryu and Someday still held their own. Someday absolutely destroyed Darshan in that matchup. And Ryu's a guy who I had a lot of question marks about heading into this season. And the first 2 games, he looked much more comfortable than he did in 2017 summer. He looked more like he did in spring and back on his time on H2K. And if he continues to play like this, then 100 Thieves is definitely going to be a team not only fighting for playoffs, but fighting to make some noise in the playoffs. So 2-0 start, exactly what Afromoo and co would want after the first week. And he's probably feeling good about staying with 100 Thieves over CLG, who's 0-2. We'll get to them in a minute. But as I mentioned before, the eSports Network's Zorine was able to meet up with Afromoo during week 1 of the NA LCS studios, and here's what he had to say about joining that 100 Thieves squad.
And what is it about 100 Thieves in particular that kind of caught your attention or appealed to you specifically?
I think it was Nate Chat, mostly. When he contacted me, we set up a meeting. He was super passionate, very accommodating, wanted the best for his players, probably because of his experience as being a player when he used to play COD back in the day. So it just translates over. really liked that aspect. And then the 3 players they had already signed were Ryu, Someday, and Meteos. Played with Meteos before in All-Stars, really loved his playstyle, and I think jungle support synergy is very important. Meteos is a very easy guy to get along with, and definitely, you know, very blunt and honest with his opinion. So it definitely helps a lot for team cohesion, and I do think our team is going to do very well.
How much would you say personality factored into that decision for you? I mean, like in terms of both inside and outside of the game.
For players?
Yeah.
I think personality mattered a lot. Wasn't really looking for a team where I didn't think I would be able to, you know, play with those kind of players. Play with players who didn't value team-oriented stuff. But also talked to Prawley, our coach, and he was definitely, you know, all about it. And all the players as well were all about it.
Well, obviously, Afro, a lot of thought going into why he joined 100 Thieves. And right now, it looks like a pretty solid decision. And for his former team, CLG, not a great start to the opening week of the LCS. They go down 0-2. But listen, it wasn't the world's worst 0-2 start to the season. They had some tough matches. They had to go against C9 and 100 Thieves. Again, a team a lot of people pegging to make playoffs this split. So one of the tougher opening weeks out of any of the teams in the league. That initial Cloud9 game, you know, they had an early lead and then kind of gave it up. Cloud9 got back into it and then really kind of steamrolled it from there pretty quickly. And against the 100 Thieves, again, I talked about that bot lane pressure, really getting them ahead. But another key point was Someday just absolutely destroyed Darshan in that top lane matchup. And, you know, that's going to happen a lot of the time with a Gnar, especially against a Gangplank. That's a tough matchup. And we've seen some varying degrees of success with this Gnar in laning phase. But, I mean, 100 Thieves really just played a very solid game. I don't think CLG looked that bad. It was just some really stellar Gnar play, like I mentioned, out of Someday. And really just, I'm impressed by the macro play of 100 Thieves. Just being able to snowball that bottom lane into objectives, turrets, dragons, and they got pretty lucky with some really strong dragons in that early game to get them rolling. And closed it out, not super quickly, but that's kind of the theme of week 1. So 100 Thieves, Meteos, and Ryu performing better than I was expecting in week 1. Biofrost looked a little off. The Janna pick was somewhat questionable, not really something we're seeing out of that bottom lane. It's more tank focused. It's really tank support, tank jungler, and then a carry top laner for a lot of these squads or something like that Gnar. But it's not quite the end of the world yet for CLG. Again, tough week 1 matchup. They're definitely going to bounce back in week 2. The sky's not falling for CLG, but a lot of people think the sky is falling for TSM. I can't believe I've waited this long to talk about them. 0-2 in their first week of the LCS with the new look Dream Team lineup. First game of the 2018 NALCS. They get absolutely destroyed by Team Liquid. We don't even need to go over that game because they just got destroyed all across the board there. And then game 2 against FlyQuest, well, how'd they lose that? It actually started pretty well for them. They got first blood, and they were out to a couple thousand gold lead early on, but then there was a big turnaround team fight here where they get so many FlyQuest members low, but I don't know how Sven didn't finish off Anda there, but they don't get any kills in this team fight, and then FlyQuest is able to snowball that into some objectives. Turret mid, they eventually get a dragon, and then they just rush a Baron because TSM is playing so far back in this game. Even when they were ahead early on, they rarely seem to go beyond their own river. And because of that, FlyQuest is able to just rush down the Baron, and the rest of TSM is so far back that they can't do much. They clean up this team fight. Bjergsen doing his best to output some damage on the Xerath, but FlyQuest cleaned that one up, and that was a big turning point to get FlyQuest into this game. And then TSM played pretty similarly the rest of the game. They were just playing so passively, kind of waiting for FlyQuest to make a mistake to get them back into the game. And they didn't really. So TSM, there definitely still seems to be some communication issues, and people were expecting it's not going to flick a switch and they're going to be the best team of all time in NA with so many new pieces, and they're trying to implement different shot callers. Who's going to be the main shot caller, or for different aspects of the game with a guy like Mithy coming in? How do they divvy it up amongst Hansor, Bjergsen, and Mithy? But I will say Sven and Mithy, they were making some uncharacteristic mistakes just mechanically. You saw Sven out of position kind of, whether it was a misclick or anything like that. And of course, people are roasting Bjergsen, but I know that before he never really got blame, and now since Worlds he's getting a lot of the blame. He's a KDA player, bloggity bloggity blah. But I mean, he had 100% kill participation in that game against FlyQuest. He did an insane amount of damage, over 52,000 damage in that game, which was like 20,000 more than anyone else in that game. I know you're playing Zerath, and that's kind of like Varus, where your numbers are heavily inflated. But I mean, you're not going to just pin that loss on any one person on TSM. They're still kind of trying to mesh together. They're 0-2, first time ever, but I mean, you don't need to panic yet. You don't need to panic yet for TSM. It's only week 1. It's only week 1. This is probably a year-long plan for them to compete internationally. No need to panic yet. Although, that Team Liquid game was very disappointing, and they looked like the TSM from Worlds, where they just don't do anything. They roll over, lose the game. They got destroyed, but there's time yet for TSM. So what is this meta? Early on in 2018, we're a couple weeks in. Well, not even a couple weeks in. Pretty much a week in across the league. So what is the meta going on here? Well, I'll tell you what. The meta is play longer than 40 minutes. 9 of the 20 games in the LCS weekend, in week 1 of the LCS this weekend, went over 40 minutes. Almost half the games were over 40 minutes, and you had 2 60-minute games. That's not even counting the 95-minute trilogy that went on between SKT and Jin Air earlier in the weekend. But, I mean, the main reason you're looking at this, you got champions like Ryze that are meta. People just aren't dying with this stupid Zhonya's Realm Warp thing, which is just way better than Flash, and you can get your whole team out. It's a shorter cooldown. There's so low kills even in these 60-minute games because you got these disengaged champions like Ryze, like Azir, and also the wave clear from champions like Azir. You saw the Sivir, Tristana's got pretty insane wave clear. Even the Malzahar, that's a heavily contested pick right now. You're just crushing down these minions, and that's why you're seeing insane CS numbers in a lot of these games. Also, I think that's due a bit to the fact that the jungle camps change your CS numbers. You're getting 2 from red and blue buff. You're getting 4 from some of these camps. So I think it's heavily inflated because some of these games, guys are like over 70 or 80 CS, over 1 CS a minute, which is absolutely insane. And I feel like we were not seeing it nearly at the rate that we are as far as last season. So I think the numbers are a bit skewed there. But these wave clear and disengage comps are just dragging out these games forever. And also, it's a lot of new teams. They're still figuring out how to play the macro game, how to close games out with the new roster. Not so much the case in the LCK. I don't know what their excuse is. But in the LCS, there's a lot of new rosters, and they're still just figuring things out. But these wave clear comps, man, holy smokes. Also, we got to talk about stopwatches. League of Stopwatches is very real. In 10 LCS games, 10 NA LCS games, we saw 60 stopwatches out of a possible 100, 60% of the time. 60% of all this. There's so many stopwatches. That's what I'm trying to get at. Screw the numbers. There's too many stopwatches. They got to do something with that rune. It's fine to buy it for 600 gold, but starting with it in your inventory is insane. It makes diving early under turret easy. Like, you don't even need to worry about anything. You don't even need to do perfected dives because you have that get out of jail free card in that stopwatch to drop the turret aggro on usually 2 or 3 guys that are part of that dive. So Riot's got to look into that because it's too much. It's too much. It's one thing to have to go buy Zhonya's, but I mean, that's just too much. Too much. Week 1 had a lot of upsets, and I mean, the EU standings are insane. You got, what is it, 8 teams at 1-1, and then you got Vitality 2-0 and Unicorns at 0-2. So it's pretty insane. But after week 1, it's time to hand out some awards. You know, not really awards. You know, every game you got your post-game lobby. You can honor someone or you can report someone. And I know everyone reports at least one person, usually for unskilled, after a game. But after week 1, let's go through some of the guys who deserve to be honorable teammates and someone who you might consider reporting. First up, honorable teammate from NA. You got to look at a guy like Huni. He comes back to NA and he puts up a fantastic opening week, 8.5 KDA. His CSD at 15 was absolutely absurd. And he's pumping out some serious damage. It helps when you're playing champions like Lucian and Anar where you can pump out that stuff. But that's all the best among top laners. And if the meta continues to be where you can put a guy like Huni on these carry top laners, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with and probably be the best top laner in NA, especially with an aggressive jungler like Dardoch helping him out there. But yeah, he dismantled solo against Clutch and had his way with Flame in the opening day. So this is a scary guy, and he could legitimately get some MVP votes if Echo Fox continue to play well and sit in that 4 to 6, maybe even 3 to 6 range going forward. So Huni, you get some honor. Whether it's tilt proof, I don't know if I'd give Huni tilt proof. Probably a great teammate because you got all the junglers' attention and helped open up the other lanes. Out in EU, they only went 1-1, but the man in the mid lane for Fnatic, Caps, was absolutely fantastic. He was putting up some insane numbers. 15 KDA. That damage percentage was like 7 or 8% higher than the second highest in the league. 24 CSD at 15. He was out of control on Azir. He had like 370 CS at like 28 minutes or something ridiculous like that. This is a guy who we're expecting a lot of coming into this split. He's got a full year of competitive play under his belt, and with a lot of the EU mid laners leaving, he should fight with perks to be that top tier mid lane in EU going forward. And it's a pretty solid start for him in week 1. Fnatic as a whole has some glaring issues they got to clean up, but for Caps in that mid lane, he looked absolutely fantastic in the first 2 weeks, or first 2 games. Obviously played Zoe as well, and that highlight against the Vladimir where he hits it for 60% of his health is ridiculous. Everyone honors someone. You get cool stuff when you honor guys post-game, but more often than not, you're going to report someone, usually because you're mad about the game. Now, it is week 1, so it's quick to react. It's a little too early to actually judge, but some guys you might consider reporting after week 1. You got to look to somebody on TSM after their not so stellar performances in their first 2 games, and it's got to be the new bot lane. Sven and Mithy did not put up great numbers. 0.9 at 1.3 KDA. Oh, that's so bad. Kill participation 60 and 50%. Goal differential of minus 228 for Sven. They had some, like I mentioned before, very uncharacteristic misplays, and for the amount of hype that's coming into this best bot lane in the West, they got pretty destroyed in that opening week. I do not see this theme continuing at all. Of course, TSM, fully expect them to bounce back in the coming weeks. It's only 1 week, but whew, they did not look good in those games. Mithy was getting caught out a lot on the Tom Kench. He didn't seem to be on the same page with his teammates. Someone would die or not be in position to help him out, and he would just go forward on a warding expedition or try and clear some wards, do anything like that, and he was just getting caught out. And I mentioned Sven's positioning, not what we're accustomed to seeing from one of the best 80 carries in EU. So after week 1, I don't know. Might throw some reports the way of Sven and Mithy, but again, they'll be back in week 2 as well as the rest of TSM. In terms of EU, for someone to maybe throw a report their way, we're looking at Splice. We're looking at Odoamne, who has been a top-tier top laner for the past however many years in EU, but he had a rough go of it in week 1. He got destroyed in lane in both games. Now, he did get a lot of jungle attention. He gave up first blood in both of those games. The Gnar game wasn't too bad, but you think he'd have a bigger advantage in lane with that Gnar, and he got soloed a couple times by the Ornn of Soaz, which you're not exactly expecting to see. And then that second game on Illaoi, again, he did get camped a lot, but I mean, some of those deaths he could have avoided. He was just disrespecting the Unicorns of Love quite a bit there. And even though they won that game, his Illaoi was not that impressive for a champion that I think's OP. I think Illaoi's a busted champion. But Odoamne did not look great in that week 1. Again, a guy I expect to bounce back. He's a perennial all-pro hovering on that edge of the top laners in EU. He'll be back in week 2, but week 1, not great. Not great. But it's only going to go up from here for him. So those are guys from week 1. There's plenty of guys you could pick from. A couple guys I'd also like to just shout out is obviously Jizuki on Vitality. What an LCS debut for him. He was fantastic. And Licorice On Cloud9, this is a guy people, thought was going to be a heavy downgrade from Impact, but he looked pretty fantastic in both games for Cloud9. Gangplank in the first game. He did get camped a little bit, but he was very close to getting some turnarounds in these 1v2, 1v3 ganks where he almost got a kill. And then game 2 on the Kled, he had some fantastic flanks, TP flanks, and was just playing that champion super well for them. So more carry-focused top laners. I didn't expect to see that from him, but if that's the meta, he's showing that he's more than capable of it. So good job to Licorice. And make sure, again, you guys are sending in your questions throughout this show, because I'm sure you've got a lot about week 1, because a lot of stuff did go down. Now, got a little fun bit here. At the end of every game, you know that the winning team goes to the losing team's side for handshakes, and we have an interesting theme this year with so many ex and teammates that have played together before that are all on different teams now. So there's going to be bound to be some interesting handshakes, whether it's a hug or a cold shoulder, or mainly just a whiff. So we're going to look at some of the best handshakes from week 1 in the LCS, and we got to start off with some of the whiffs on the handshake. So you got Maxor going to Nuke Duck, and he doesn't know what kind of handshake to go for. He tries to save it with Vander, which he does, so he saves it there. Then you got Sven Skaren saying hi to Biofrost. He goes for the handshake, but Bio wants a little more out of him. He wants the hug. Come on, Sven, you got to hug your former buddy there. They're able to make it up there, so that's a beautiful hug. And then we got the emotional ones. Jizuki hugging his boy Ruin. They used to play on Giants together. I love seeing passionate, genuine hugs between friends. And this is a little more than a hug. Jack Troll meeting up with his lady friend after a win over H2K. He earned himself a kiss, and good for him. He had a pretty solid game for Vitality. This is the most heartwarming hug you'll see from week 1. Afromu and Huni. Look how he reacts with other people. He's not as interested, but it's the rub. The rub on the back is key. It's not a pat, it's a rub. That is true friendship. And then H2K against Fnatic. This is just a string of sturdy handshakes, ending with Sheriff and Soaz. That is how you do a handshake, ladies and gentlemen. Promise Q and Soaz a quick one, but this shakedown, that's how you do a handshake, Sheriff. You get you meet with the hands, and then a sturdy shake, just one shake up and down. Don't do any more than that. A lot of the time, these handshakes are too weak that they do in these post games, but you got to make them. You got to make them last. You got to make them count, and you got to assert dominance. Especially if you're the winning team, you got to have a sturdy handshake to show that you're confident in your team's abilities. Especially since you just won the game. But we'll hopefully be revisiting some of these handshakes going forward, because there's usually some interesting tomfoolery that goes on in these post-game hangouts between teams. So we'll be revisiting those as we go onwards. But now, it's time for power rankings. Time to completely overreact after week 1. And of course, these power rankings are solely off of week 1. The performances from teams there. And we'll be revisiting these as the weeks go on. Adjusting them, I'm sure, depending on how teams perform. But after week 1, let's start with EU, which is just everyone beats everyone, as is the theme in EU. You got 8 1-1 teams, which is absolutely insane. But at the top, it's still the Kings, G2. I know they're only 1-1 and they lost the game to Roccat, but they put up a super solid performance against Misfits, and they could have won that Roccat game. Roccat played super well, so kudos to them. But G2 still had a chance to win that game. Misfits, they were close against G2. It kind of got out of their hands pretty quickly, though. But then they put up a very solid performance against Schalke, who did have a sub, but we'll get back to that later. Vitality, the only 2-0 team after the initial week. It wasn't against the toughest competition taken on H2K and Giants, but they did completely dismantle H2K, and maybe 3 is a little high for them here, but the sheer fashion that they put forward this 2-0, you got to give them some love. Fnatic in at number 4. Even in their win, they didn't look that dominant, or you can't feel that confident in them with that win over Splice, and I expect a little more out of Fnatic. I highlighted Caps. That was really that was the best part out of Fnatic. Reckless looked not like the Reckless that we saw in 2019's 2017 summer or at Worlds. I don't know how much of that is working with a new bottom lane in Hylissang, but Fnatic got a lot of issues that they have to fix, and Macro's definitely one of them. Schalke, they're a little complicated because they did have Vander role swapping to that 80 carry spot, but they did destroy Roccat in that opening week with Vander as a sub, and he looked great on the Varus. Taking notes from Forgiven and their time back together, but Schalke should probably be higher, but just because they have a sub, it kind of complicates things. I expect them to rise in the power rankings. I expect them to sit around top 3. Roccat, they beat G2. They seem to do it once a split, so they got this one out of the way early with. They're in at 6. H2K, able to knock off Fnatic, which is very impressive, but they looked absolutely terrible against Vitality in that opening game. Splice, oh yuck. They had a questionable game against Fnatic that they ended up losing, and even the game that they won is a 60-plus minute game against the Unicorns of Love, who look absolutely terrible. That's why they're coming in at 10, so not too much faith in Splice after the opening week. And then Giants sitting at 1-1. The lone win against the Unicorns of Love. I expect them to kind of hang around in the bottom 2-3 area for the majority of the split, but again, I'll just say Unicorns did not look very good. But EU, very interesting after week 1 with those 8 1-1 teams. And we thought it would be the most competitive split in EU to date, and it looks like it's going to be after week 1. But I still think that G2 Misfits are going to be hanging out at the top. Probably going forward as well, depending. But Misfits had a tough opening week, and they still put up a very solid performance in both games. Let's get on to NA. Not as many 1-1 teams there. We got some 2-0s and some 0-2s coming in that top spot. I don't know how you don't put Liquid. They completely dismantled TSM. They struggled a bit against Optic, actually quite a bit against Optic. That was a very back and forth game that they could have legitimately lost, but they do come out with the clean 2-0. Most of that because of the dismantling of TSM. Echo Fox in at number 2. Now, they didn't have a tough schedule by any means, FlyQuest and Clutch Gaming, but the sheer dominance that they showed in those games just completely destroyed them. Again, very reminiscent of that 2016 Immortals roster. They do have 2 players from that squad in Huni and Adrian. They looked super solid in those games, and I'm curious to see them against some of the top tier teams in NA. Cloud9 also 2-0. They knocked off CLG and the Golden Guardians. Not the toughest schedule. Obviously, CLG is a solid squad, but Cloud9 looked very good. Jensen, pretty much no drop-off from 2017, and I already highlighted Licorice. He was very impressive. And Sven Skaren, not at his best that I think we're going to see with him on Cloud9, but people were sleeping on them, saying that they're done. They look pretty good. 100 Thieves, didn't expect them to go 2-0. They had that, again, another slugfest with Optic that didn't instill too much face, but then they played a really solid game against CLG and just really were able to snowball that early lead in that bottom lane. Then we got CLG, which I know we got them ahead of a couple teams that actually have some wins, while CLG is 0-2, but they had a legitimate chance in that Cloud9 and 100 Thieves game. They had an early lead in that C9 one, and maybe could have won that game if they played it a little cleaner, but Cloud9 played a pretty solid game. But CLG, I don't think you can be too disappointed in both of those games. There's clearly signs there that this is going to be a solid team, and don't expect them to be winless for much longer. FlyQuest, they got completely destroyed by Echo Fox, but they beat TSM after getting behind a few gold early on, so you got to have them coming in at number 6. Clutch, I mean, they beat Golden Guardians, which, as you can see, are in at number 10 on these power rankings, so not a big-time win, and they got pretty destroyed by Echo Fox. Again, I am shocked that Phoenix just won that mid lane matchup pretty much by himself, and handily so. Did not see that coming. Optic, first 0-2 team, but they were in both of their games against 2 playoff teams. Team Liquid, they really gave them a run for their money, and they took 100 Thieves to a 60-plus minute game, so I was very happily surprised by the performance of Optic. Power of Evil, we knew he'd have to be the main carry on that team. He looked great, but Arrow looked a lot better than he did in 2017 summer. Zeke and Acadian were decent. Lemon Nation continues to die a lot. All right, TSM. They're in at number 9. They went 0-2. They got completely destroyed by Liquid, completely destroyed. Had no chance in that game. And then they had a lead against FlyQuest and just kind of sat back and waited for them to make a mistake. Who knows? But they did not look solid in that macro game at all. They didn't know how to build on their couple thousand gold lead early on, and they were just playing way too passive. Clearly still a lot of things they have to figure out going forward. I fully expect them to climb up much higher in these power rankings over the next couple weeks and be in that top 3. But after week 1, they did not leave much to be desired for this dream team lineup. They did not look very good, but they're going to climb their way back out of there. Golden Guardians, whew, I don't know if they're climbing their way much higher than that. The only team without an import, and that's probably why they're going to be near the bottom for the majority of the split. I don't see them getting outside of the bottom 3 going forward. So that's after week 1. Those could be changing quite a bit going forward. But yeah, a lot of info to digest after week 1. And you've already got the LCK and everything else starting up tomorrow morning. So there's league almost 7 days a week going forward. Competitive league 7 days a week going forward. Plenty of games to be watching. We got a lot more interesting matchups in the LCS heading into week 2. But I'm sure there's questions you guys want to have answered. So let's get into the question time. Everybody's favorite time of the day. Question time. I will say that Team Liquid TSM match didn't quite live up to the hype. All right, let's get in. Let's dive in. Inferno, who would win? 100 Thieves or Echo Fox? I mean, that's an interesting early season matchup, but that top lane matchup, that's the 2 best top laners in the league right now, Someday and Huni. I'd expect a lot of attention there. Both guys probably going to put on some carry top lane champions, but I might go with Echo Fox right now just because I did not expect Phoenix to be as dominant in lane as he was in that first week. And when you have 2 dominant solo laners like that with an aggressive jungler like Dardoch, I mean, the opportunities are endless for him. And that bottom lane, they don't need ganks. They don't really need help. They can hold their own, Altec and Adrian. So I might lean towards Echo Fox in that one. Damian Gray, can you tell us some of your favorite LCS players? I mean, there's a lot of guys that came over. Most exciting for me to watch are Huni right now. I'm excited to see how Licorice does in that top lane. I loved watching Contracts on Cloud9, so we'll see if, I mean, he's going to have to play out of his mind to carry Golden Guardians out of the depths of that bottom 3. But right now, Huni's super interesting to me. Licorice, how he does on that Cloud9 squad. Junglers, I want to see Sven Skaren. I want to see Reignover. I want to see how they are working in their new teams. And I want to see that bot lane of Sven and Mithy play like the best bot lane in the West, because they definitely did not in week 1. Do you think Fnatic would become better, and does Vitality have a change to become the new king of EU? I don't think Vitality is going to become the new kings in Europe. Again, they beat 2 not so great teams in that opening week. They did look great, and I think I had them just on the edge of the playoffs, I think in that 7th spot behind H2K, but they could easily make playoffs, I think, with that squad. And we're forgetting that this is a team that has 4/5 of that Giant squad, so there's that inherent synergy right away heading into week 1, which is definitely going to help out. You throw in Cabochard in that top lane, who's shown to be a very solid top laner, and they don't have as many roster changes, really, as a lot of these teams, so they hit the ground running. I don't know if they're going to be the new kings, but they could make playoffs. Michael Gleason, don't you think Biofrost looked lost during laning phase without double lift? And if so, do you think it will change? Yeah, he didn't look great. Again, I didn't really understand the Janna pick in that game. That doesn't really seem to be where the meta's at right now. I think he'll only get better, develop more synergy with Stixxay. Both these guys have a lot to prove, being kind of the second fiddle of some legendary bottom lanes. So they got a lot to prove. I think they still need time to develop that synergy and get a full read on what the meta is. But yeah, I do think Biofrost did not look great. Favorite teams in the NALCS. Favorite teams to watch. I mean, so far that 100 Thieves lineup has a lot of personality. with guys like Medios, Afromu. Rio doesn't have as much personality, but he's basically a meme for not having personality, which is always fun. And seeing Someday just bot people in that top lane is very interesting. So 100 Thieves is one of my favorite teams to watch. How do you think they'll do in week 2? Eddie Torre, 400 Thieves. I mean, if they keep playing like they do, again, I was so impressed by their macro play after week 1. I think they could do as well again, maybe 1-1. I think this is going to be a team that does better than I expected them to do heading into 2018. I had them just miss it out on playoffs after week 1. I'm heavily considering changing my idea on that, but we'll see how they do in week 2. I think they'll continue to perform at a high level because they're getting the version of Ryu, at least so far, that was actually an above-average mid laner. The second half of his stretch with P1, he looked pretty terrible, to be honest, with a very small champion pool, but now he looks very solid on Malzahar and Ryze, which are, I mean, the triumvirate of meta mid laners right now. You throw in that Azir, which I'm not so sure he's capable on that, but we'll see. But Ryu looks great, which was a big question mark for me. Master Swag King, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did Licorice perform? I'd probably give him a 7 or an 8. He looked really comfortable on that C9 squad, and he wasn't just playing tanks. Kled and Gangplank. Kled a pick we didn't see much throughout any of the competitive games in week 1, but again, his TP flanks were fantastic, and even when he was getting camped on that Gangplank in their first game, he kept his CS and almost so close to turning around a lot of these ganks. So I was very impressed by Cloud9's performance in week 1. I wonder what Afro said to Biofrost there. That is interesting. Yeah, he put his arm on her shoulder, said, you know, you're going to get flamed for going 0-2, but it's okay because CLG is great and they treat you well. I don't know. Or he probably just talked some smack and said, you're nothing, kid. I'm way better than you. Shanghai Noon is a much worse movie than Rush Hour, which I wholeheartedly agree. Shanghai Noon is a terrible movie. But that's the bottom line. Wesley Brown, as a C9 fan of a couple of years, I think as Jensen becomes more of a team player in the mid lane, the rest of the league should be terrified. He was always a monster in mid. What are your thoughts? I mean, yeah, he's going to continue to develop. You think back to way back when, his inaugural split with Cloud9, and he did not perform well, and he got a lot of backlash from the community because C9 replaced High with him, and he wasn't exactly living up to that legendary name. But ever since then, he has developed and become a top-tier mid laner, not just in NA, but in the Western Hemisphere. So I think having Sven Skaren come onto that team, their play styles really match one another, and you're going to see another level. Jensen be able to reach another level, and he will be a force to be reckoned with in that mid lane. Why do you have Clutch over Optic? I would put Optic above Clutch because they look good versus two top 4 teams. Also, Clutch kind of just rolled over and died versus Fox. That is true. They did die versus them, and I could hear your argument. I could see Optic going over Clutch because, yeah, they were in both of those games that they lost, and Clutch did only beat Golden Guardians, which not a great team. So, yeah, I could see your argument for putting Optic over Clutch. The main reason just is, yes, they have a win, and then you'll say, I know you put CLG higher, but I feel like that was a one-off for Clutch, so maybe I kind of cheated a bit. I'm kind of looking ahead after week 1 into week 2 that I feel like Clutch is better than that. Did C9 silence the haters? Most people put them below CLG. I mean, 1 week isn't enough to silence the haters, but I think the decibel level of the haters are a little lower for C9, specifically towards Licorice, because again, people were like, this guy cannot replace Impact. He cannot be at the same level as a former world champion top die. But he looked pretty great. He looked pretty great in that first week. So did Impact on Liquid, but people saying Cloud9's down and out, downgrades in the top lane, downgrades in the jungle with Sven Skaren. Well, they look pretty good in week 1, so they're well on their way to silencing those haters. Tyler Longhofer, do you think the growing criticism of Bjergsen's play is justified now that the spotlight is more on him since he is the one constant on TSM besides Hanser? Okay, so Bjergsen has gotten a lot of backlash. ever since Worlds. He's a KDA player. He plays too passively. In that first game against Liquid, he wasn't roaming when Pole Belter ran top. Haunter should have known that gank was coming. It seemed to be pretty obvious. But, I mean, you look at that FlyQuest game, you can't put that game on Bjergsen. He had 100% kill participation, insane amounts of damage. Maybe he's playing a safe champion. So the fact that he doesn't die doesn't mean he's not involved in these team fights or playing with his KDA. He's just playing smart. Some of the criticism that he's gotten is deserved. I mean, he's the captain of the team, so you're going to get all the praise when you do well, and you got to get a lot of the blame when you don't do well, whether or not it is warranted. TSM as a whole, they got a lot of things to figure out in terms of communication. I think maybe Bjergsen's going to have to take a step back from shot calling with Mithy now on the squad, even though he's kind of been gearing towards that main shot caller role for the past couple of years with TSM, and they've been basically molding him into that role, but now they're kind of flipping backwards and like, oh, now Mithy's going to be the main shot caller. But some of the criticism for Bjergsen, I get giving him some criticism, but these games are not on him through that first week. The team as a whole just kind of seemed out of sorts. Ven and Mithy were not playing to the level we're accustomed to them seeing, and I think Mike Young still has a lot of learning to do. And we're still not 100% sure what he's capable of as a player just because his career has been so short so far. Cameron Taylor, how close do you think the early standings will be towards the end of the split? Well, I certainly don't expect TSM to be 9th place come the end of the regular season. I definitely expect them to be in that top 3, at worst top 4 in those standings. It's just going to take them some time to figure stuff out. Outside of that, I will say I was more impressed with Optic than I was expecting. I still am hard-pressed to see them finishing outside of that bottom 3, but maybe they'll impress. I was a little disappointed with Clutch. I was very high, as you guys are ready to point out and pointed out quite often. I was very high on Clutch heading into this season, but they did not look too great in week 1. I do expect them to be better going forward, so I expect them to be a few spots higher. 100 Thieves, whew, I don't know if they can stay top 4, but I think if they keep playing like that, they're staying top 6. I think Echo Fox is going to come back down to earth going forward. Maybe they're still a playoff team. They still have the potential to be a playoff squad, but I mean, they're not going to dominate every team the way that they dominated FlyQuest and Clutch. Let's see what they can do against some of the top tier teams, the Liquid, Cloud9, 100 Thieves, CLG, TSM, because yes, they still will be a top team. So we'll see how they perform going forward. Paul Brennan, the meme of the year is always, will TSM win Worlds? But can TSM even make Worlds? It's week 1. They're 0-2. I fully expect them to be in contention for Worlds. I would be pretty surprised if this roster did not represent North America at Worlds as one of the 3 seeds. Fully expect them to get back into playoffs. That's such a low standard for this squad. They should be top 3. Maybe they don't win Spring. I actually don't think they'll win Spring, but I would be surprised if they didn't come back firing come Summer Split and win that one and take that top seed going into Worlds. But for Spring, they're still going to be a top team in the next couple of weeks. Do you think this Ven and Mithy move was a mistake, or do you think they just need time to synergize with the core members of TSM? I mean, it's definitely too early to call that move a mistake. Don't expect Ven and Mithy to play at the level they did in week 1 for the upcoming weeks. They came here to play on a competitive team and to win the NALCS, and they got that. Or on paper, they got one of the most competitive teams, one of the best teams in NA heading into 2018. Yeah, they just need some time to synergize. They got 3 new members. They've got to figure out how to delegate a lot of these shot calling responsibilities, because you had Hanser, you had Bjergsen, and Doublelift when he was on the team as your 3 main voices on that squad. You still got 2 of them, so it's just kind of fitting in Mithy. Maybe he's got more of the early game, who's got the mid game, the objective decisions. There's a lot. Most teams don't have just one shot caller that calls anything. Maybe High. He's like the only guy that I can think of that's like the sole shot caller. A lot of these teams have guys calling different aspects of the game, so TSM has to figure out where Mithy fits in in that regards. And it'll take some time. It might not even be week 2. I can't see them going 0-4, but maybe they go 1-1. They might not have a 2-0 week for a while. It's going to take time to develop. Brandon Boren, after watching 100 Thieves' second game against CLG, do you think they can beat TL? I definitely think they could have a competitive game there. There's a lot of storylines within 100 Thieves Team Liquid matchup. Everyone's talked about, listen, the main storyline is Liquid TSM, understandably so, but there's so many other little storylines. 100 Thieves Liquid, you got Cody Sun going against his former bot lane party, couple ex-teammates. Afro and Doublelift is always an interesting one. And then you got Afro and former teammates in Smithy and Pobelter. There's so many interesting storylines there. But I mean, 100 Thieves, they looked very solid against CLG. They did struggle against Optic, which makes me hesitate a little bit. I would favor Liquid in that matchup after these week 1 games. But I think 100 Thieves, if Ryu and Meteos play at the level that they did through week 1 or a similar level, I think they can compete and put up a fight against pretty much any team in the league. And does 100 Thieves have what it takes to win NA? Best of one's totally different animal than a best of series, and with basically all these rosters in NA, you haven't seen them in a best of series, so it's hard to judge how they'll play in those types of games, which makes it hard to predict in playoffs. But just because there's so many veteran guys on Team Liquid, even though there are 100 Thieves too, so maybe that point doesn't work too much. But Cody Sun, less experienced than a lot of these guys. I feel like in a series, Team Liquid, TSM would be more favored in a lot of these matchups just because they have so much experience, and best ofs are way different than best of ones. Uga Kika 34. Do you need to spend a ban on Azir every time you play against Phoenix? I think you need to spend a ban on Azir every game. Doesn't matter who's there. But yeah, that's definitely one of Phoenix's comfort picks. He dismantled Fevivin in that matchup, and I think it's probably something you definitely want to ban against Echo Fox. Try and see what Phoenix can do on some of these other champions. But I was very impressed with his play through week 1. I was very skeptical of him coming into 2018, and he performed very well. Do you think Splice can make the playoffs? Ooh, they didn't look great in week 1, but this is a team that I still think has the talent on that roster to make a playoff spot. It's kind of how well can Niski perform, because he had moments on Envy last year that he looked really solid on. He played super well against Bjergsen and some of the other top guys in NA. Xerxes, he looked pretty good on the Ivern. He's got some weird picks, but if the meta is more tank-oriented in that jungle, I think that hurts Splice, just because it's nice to have him on a carry champion. But that means Odawane might be playing carry guys, and I know he was the reported guy from EU this week, but I expect him to be better on carry top laners later on. There's a lot of vets on that squad, so I think they have a good chance of making playoffs. Scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think Phoenix played? Listen, Febivin's a guy I hyped out a lot, so I got to give him about a 9, because I think Febivin will be one of the best mid laners in NA this split, top 4. So the fact that Phoenix just handed it to him, you got to give him a 9 in that regard. He performed super well on that Azir. Eli Grant, can you rank the NA LCS mid laners? I mean, I can throw you a top 4, top 5 maybe going forward. In no particular order, you're going to have, I might throw Jensen at the top right now. Bjergsen's going to be up there, even though TSM's 0-2 and ranked 9th in the power rankings. Bjergsen's one of the best mid laners in Western League of Legends. So Jensen, Bjergsen, I still think a guy like Febivin's going to be up there. You'd probably throw Phoenix. I'm not throwing him in that top 5 yet. Not yet. Not after 1 week. A guy like Huni, I think, is still going to rebound and be good in there. Guys just outside there, I mean, there's so many good guys in that mid lane. PoE, High, really the only person I'm not putting in these top tier mid laners is going to be High. That might be it. Oh, I'll throw in Keen and Fly, whoever's going to be starting on FlyQuest. I think those are the bottom tier guys going forward. But the mid lane talent pool in NA is absolutely insane. But I think Jensen is going to be at the top come the end of the regular season. Trevor Miley, is Tyler 1 a dead stream? that guy's still pulling some insane numbers, man. He did his whatever it was, 48-hour, 72-hour stream. He's still pulling 60, 70K a stream, so it's definitely not dead. It's still the most popular league stream around right now. Maybe it'll die off soon, but doesn't look like it. Moment Sied, do you see jungle meta going back to carry junglers Lee Sin, Eve, in Italy, and do you think that will make a difference to Mike Young's performance as opposed to his current performance on tank junglers? I mean, I feel like Lee Sin is a pick you can always fit into pretty much any meta, so maybe he can fall back onto that. But I do think the tank meta hurts him a little bit, and I don't really see it changing because carry top laners are just so strong right now. Champions like Camille, Gangplank is pretty busted with that Klepto. Ilaoi, I think we're going to start seeing more of in that top lane, obviously the Gnar, and maybe more people start playing that Lucian in that top lane, just these split push guys who you have to send more than one person to deal with. So I think the tank duties are going to support and the jungle, so that might be tough for Mike Young going forward. But I do think a carry-oriented meta in the jungle would help him out a little bit. Jose Mendez, do you stand by your preseason power rankings today? Well, we had TSM at 1, and they are currently 9 after week 1. But I do think TSM will still be the top, one of the top, if not the top teams come the end of the regular season and heading into playoffs. I know it looks quite unlikely heading into week 1. What else did we have that was probably bad? Looks bad after week 1. We had 100 Thieves 7. They look a little better than that, obviously, at 2-0, but I think these pools are going to even out a little bit. We had Echo Fox at 6. I still think they're in that 4 to 6 range, along with 100 Thieves 4 to 7. We had Clutch at 4. That's probably the one you're talking about. They don't look like the 4th best team in NA after week 1. I do still think that's a playoff team. I think Febiven's going to perform better than he did against Phoenix in that game against Echo Fox. I think they'll get better. Solo got completely destroyed, but I still think they'll be a playoff squad. So I stand by them for now. Maybe in a couple weeks I'll completely backtrack on everything I said before. But for now, we're standing tall. Van Moord, what do you think was the weakest link on TSM this week? I mean, if you're going player or... I mean, the main weakest link was their communication, their macro play. They just didn't seem to know what to do when they were behind and what to do with a lead when they had it, which is surprising considering you have 4 decorated veteran players on that squad. So they're still clearly figuring out some communication issues. But in terms of maybe one player, I'd probably look at Mithy, just because Mithy or Sven, or call them a combo because they go everywhere together. So maybe that bottom lane, they did not play at the level that we expect from them. They look pretty rough in lane against Liquid. A couple of misplays really got them behind, got the snowball going. And Mithy was just getting caught out a lot. Trying to do some deep warding all by himself, not communicating with Mike Young to kind of set up vision together with their jungler. So that is going to be a serious issue going forward for TSM if they don't fix that. You think Mike Young underperformed? TSM as a whole underperformed, so I guess, I mean, Mike Young didn't stand out in those losses, so you could say he underperformed, but I mean, the standard of excellence, the level for this kid, the bar that it's set is a little absurd, partially due to myself, people like myself as well. The bar is set ridiculously high for a guy who's basically got a pro career that spans 6 months. So, I mean, he did underperform for all the hype that was up to him, and I do think he's capable of playing much better. Will Jensen clap all NA mids? Yeah, I think he will. I think you'll be saying that Jensen's the best mid laner come the end of the regular season, heading into playoffs. Much like the argument could be made for him in 2017 summer. Guys' mechanics are out of control, and now with a jungler like Sven Skaren, again, I think their play styles suit one another, and they are going to dominate that duo of jungle mid lane. Look out for Jensen. Did Lucian nerfs make him go top or something? I mean, you don't have to deal with that 2v2 with his short range in that bottom lane is really what killed him, I feel like, and then they started nerfing his damage. But in the top lane, any ranged attack is a pretty good advantage, so I can see why he fit there. That's kind of why he went mid lane. It wasn't as big a deal to have that shortened range. So I think they probably played a part in it as to why he's more meta as a solo laner. And obviously, he can avoid ganks pretty easily with that relentless pursuit, that dash. So he's just a solid solo laner. All right, last question here. Do you guys think TSM's losses can be blamed on Reggie as they started scrims much later than many other teams? I mean, less practice than a lot of these teams would definitely explain why they have so many things not sorted out. That's probably a key contributor. I don't know if you blame that on Reggie. I don't know why they started late, if that was his idea. I know getting Sven and Mithy over actually into NA took a little longer than expected to get visas and things like that. So maybe that had a bit of hampering on them going forward. But that's definitely a part in it. That's why it's going to take them a little longer to develop synergy, develop their communication. So it's not the end of the world yet for TSM. It's 1 week. They're 0-2. And we've seen this team before even come in as not a top seed in the playoffs and run the table. Came in as a 6th seed and were one team fight away from winning a split title. So I'd still be scared of playing TSM if I'm other squads. But from the TSM point of view, all these teams want to beat you. They expect you to be the top. They're going to give you your very best. Team Liquid, they pretty much prepped only for TSM. Doublelift didn't even know who was on Optic. He didn't even know who was playing on that roster after they beat TSM because their preparation was fully on TSM. And they weren't even thinking about that second game, which is why Liquid struggled against Optic. But TSM will figure things out. So if you're a TSM fan, it's okay. Deep breaths, they'll be okay. If you hate TSM, celebrate while you can, because I expect them to turn things around. It might take a little while, it might take a few weeks, but soon enough you'll be seeing them near the top of those standings. That's it. That's all the questions. It's been another episode of Get Boosted. It's fantastic the LCS is finally back, so we have some legitimate content to talk about. And we'll be back on Wednesday, 2 p.m. for 5v5 Live. Mark Horner will be joining me in studio. We'll be looking ahead to week 2 in the LCS, probably some recaps of some of the LCK games that'll be going on tomorrow and Wednesday morning, as well as some LPL maybe, other league news around the scene, and yeah, we'll look at some matchups heading into week 2 and see who's going to get off the schneid of the 0-2 start for week 1. And we'll be answering your questions as always. But that is all for today. I'm Eric Kummel for Shot Callers Esports. Thank you guys very much for sending in your questions. We appreciate it every week. We appreciate you guys coming back to watch. And I do apologize for you having to listen to my annoying voice for a full hour. God bless your ears. Rest in peace. Headphone users as well. And yeah, that's it. We'll see you guys on Wednesday. And again, I will be joined by Mark Horner. And we will see you guys then, 2 p.m. for 5v5 Live.